Good morning, everyone. Had some technical issues, but hopefully that's all worked out now, and hopefully I'll get my studio space a little more squared away today for some more live streams. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. There's been quite a lot of upheaval in the United States around our elections over the past decade, and the intensity around the election season shows no sign of slowing down. And now I'm sure that there are some outside influences, and our own government has covered that. Everybody plays games with each other's elections, so it's not really surprising. Hey, Stab and Joe, good to see you this morning. So I'm sure many of you already saw by now that there was a canvasser who was attacked. He was wearing a Rubio shirt and a DeSantis hat while he was campaigning in Hialeah in South Florida, which continues the trend that we've seen in the built-up areas going on since 2015. Now, I'm pretty active on Twitter as of late. It's a really good resource. There's a reason I keep mentioning Twitter, because it will keep you up to date with all the happenings far before YouTube or other platforms will, because people have their phones, they have Twitter on standby, and within seconds of anything happening, you'll be up to date with those things. So make sure to go find me on that platform, and it will keep you up to date with happenings around your major city. As I've mentioned in a much older video, the importance of monitoring Twitter for breaking events, especially if you live near a major metropolitan area, because anytime there's demonstrations, protests, various political leaders coming to town, you'll know where all the events are popping off way ahead of any of the media reports and long after the media leaves, because after a certain point of the day, they usually stop covering what happens during the nighttime hours, which is very problematic. But I would encourage you, if you're in the cities or you're going to attend any of these political events, going forward, make sure you have an exit plan, make sure you have a strategy in place. If you're volunteering with a political party this season, you do need to be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what neighborhoods you're going into, and make sure to carry some type of means of self-defense, if and when possible, because you will be targeted if you walk down or walk into the wrong neighborhood. Yes, thank you. This coffee this morning brought to you by the Van City Prepper channel. Appreciate it. I hope Mr. VC is doing well. I take it he's off on some secret mission, because we know that everybody who has a YouTube channel in this space is definitely a government operative. I haven't been accused of that lately, though, so that's fun. Vote Dropbox watchers in Arizona. That has been growing, and there are a lot of people of both political persuasions who are out watching these Dropboxes now. Now the left-wing individuals are actively trying to take pictures of license plates and things for people who are watching these Dropboxes from a distance. Some individuals have shown up wearing tactical gear and open carrying long arms, and this is a result of the state government creating a power vacuum and creating a complete mistrust in the system with the way everything was handled only a few years ago. And it has generally created a pretty bad situation, and it's something we should keep our eye on, because the likelihood of political violence occurring between now and election day around one of those sites, I think, is only going to grow as more and more outrage builds around a small number of people who are actively monitoring those sites, ones that typically are not under camera. At least from what we can ascertain. Not all of them are. There are a number that are under camera, but we know that a lot were put up that did not have any camera coverage on them over that time. And those sites that do have cameras, we did get some screen grabs of individuals wearing plate carriers, and local authorities are very curious who those individuals are. I would not be surprised if that was a group of agitators attempting to perhaps create a situation that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise, kind of like what we saw the other day on that Los Angeles overpass, where a group of people attempted to or professed to align with political ideology that most of us would find very abhorrent. But there they were on the 405 in Los Angeles, all 6 or 7 of them, and all the Twitterverse is very triggered over it, when frankly we just shouldn't be paying attention to them, because those aren't the groups that are likely to cause the political upheaval we're seeing right now. The diehards in that ideology, they're not putting their faces out there. They're likely off in the woods training or planning something pretty bad, and that's what the government should be focusing on, but they're not. So moving along, left-wing violence and demonstrations against mainstream conservative speakers on college campuses has returned as we enter the political season. It's definitely another thing to keep our eye on because these have been flashpoints in the past. We've seen events occur on these college campuses that then end up breaking out into the surrounding city environments. The most latest one only happened within the last day. Was at Penn State. You had conservative pundit and comedian Alex Stein, who was there, who was actively engaging with the mob. He ended up getting spit on and surrounded. He had a generally fun time with it, but we've seen how quickly those events can completely deteriorate. Berkeley being a prime example where they actually set fire to a number of things on campus in protest of some very mainstream conservative speakers who were there many years ago. Moving on to the World War III report this morning, Russian state social media is accusing Ukraine of preparing to deploy a dirty bomb, possibly around the Kherson region or other areas that have been previously evacuated by Russian authorities. Now, that appears to be the justification, possibly, for them evacuating those civilians. I think more than likely this is additional cover for what will likely become a large-scale winter offensive. Once everything freezes over, obviously time will tell. Russian NBC forces have been placed on high alert, and mobilized forces have been shown now in Western media. They are openly calling on the Russian Federation for failing to supply them with appropriate warm weather clothing, including socks, of which they've had to provide their own. The troops raising the alarm bell appear to be Uyghur or ethnic Mongolian forces, and they also claim to have not been provided with adequate communications equipment. Now, it does not appear that those individuals were in a frontline area. The propaganda that was put out was not showing them in full battle rattle, but they did appear to be forces of the conventional Russian Federation simply based on the uniforms. They were in their traditional Flora uniforms, the traditional Russian Federation Army caps, and they were in formation when this happened. It was kind of an interesting piece if you can find it. I wish I had a way to show the video to you, but it was certainly interesting to get a peek into the morale of some of the forces that have been recently activated, because morale does seem to be pretty mixed amongst Russian forces, even within their own media if you dig a little bit into it. And we have seen, of course, a large number of people who are actively fleeing the Russian Federation or Russian-controlled areas in an attempt to avoid activation or mobilization. Again, remember, anytime you see troop numbers, anytime a government tells you, oh yeah, it's 300,000, just double it, because that's the type of stuff that our own government does, and I assure you that other governments do the same thing. Also, something that I found interesting when analyzing the propaganda that's been put out with this conflict, if you'll recall earlier this year, how Western media was hyper-fixated on Russian forces deploying 40-year-old tanks. And now Western media is applauding the use of 40, 50-year-old plus equipment by Ukrainian forces. And the way that they're deploying them is very much in a hit-and-run style tactic, utilizing the drones that they have been provided or been able to obtain. And it's quite interesting how they're doing it. It's very much in line with the way that you would see most partisan manuals explaining how guerrilla movements should deploy these weapons. One piece that I saw the other day involved a T-64B that was being utilized by a Ukrainian crew, mostly as a mobile artillery piece, and they were utilizing drones to spot as to where to shoot, and then they would move the tank after one or two rounds, or once they hit the target or zeroed in on it, and then they would move on to the next position to avoid getting hit themselves, because as we know, Russian forces are also using drones in very, very large numbers, and of course we've seen the Iranian drones that have been utilized to hit major cities in Ukraine over the last several weeks. And it does not appear at this time that they really have a super effective way of dealing with them. The Russians have been deploying counter-drone technology over the last several months. There are a couple of devices, and I've seen them here in the West as well, that these manufacturers design them. They're essentially a giant rifle-looking device. You point them at the drone, pull the trigger, and you're actually able to take control of the drone's radio signal and then land the device. So we're seeing a lot of that type of stuff deployed as well. And the question is, how long can we continue to deploy or provide drones? How long can we see the supply chains hold up as far as deployment of this technology before they're either not able to charge them, get a hold of them, and they'll have to begin to alter their tactics. But they've definitely been a bit of a game changer when looking at the guerrilla warfare element, especially when you look at some of the old guerrilla warfare manuals. That's something that we'll be talking about in the near future on this channel. If you're in Europe, it's definitely something you're going to want to pay attention to because some of the information that's been put out in the past is no longer relevant, especially with the adoption of thermal technology and other updates, like, for example, these $200-300 drones, which have just been an absolute game changer. But I would encourage you still to pick up as much reference material as you can right now on partisan guerrilla warfare and get as much training as you can. I know that Poland is a really good resource for that. I know I have many viewers now who are in Europe, and any country that you can drive to where you can access arms and training, if you can't in your homeland, you need to do it now. If you are not trained up to the level of the average infantryman in your country, you need to do something about that. I see a lot of people here in the United States who profess to be patriots, and they're overweight. They're walking around in their Second Amendment t-shirt. They just LARP. They're sitting there LARPing about how patriotic they are, and they won't take any responsibility for their own safety or the safety of our country. Moving on, something I wanted to hit on as well. I saw a little unscripted rant video from Lauren Southern this morning about, and it wasn't really based on analytics or numbers or anything, but just a general vibe that I think most of us are getting. And she really hammered it because I think it's the way that most of us have been feeling. And this isn't meant to be alarmist. This isn't meant to be in any way fear-mongering. What I'm about to say, it's just general awareness. It's stuff that we all already know is happening. But she pointed out really just how deep in decline Canada is. And I've got people on my channel like Van City, and I've got a number of people I interact with on Twitter now who are in Canada. And the conversations that we've had about the politics up there, it's really fascinating because if you just remove the political party names in Canada, the left operates from the same playbook, 100%. Like, it sounds like the exact paradigms you see here in the United States. And right now, the populists in Canada, the conservatives in Canada, are winning. We're not going to see people just lay down when it comes to accepting the decline of major cities. And even in Canada, there's pushback to it, which is a good thing. But all we're doing is pumping the brakes. That's what it feels like at this point. And she hit on just the explosive cost of living. Canada, in my opinion, is only a few years ahead of where the United States will likely head. A lot of Chinese nationals have hid money in Canada in the form of real estate. So if you go to their major cities, you'll see these very small ranch houses, maybe 800, 1,500 square feet, and they're selling for $3, $4, $5 million. I'm not sure how Canadians afford to live in Canada anymore. I don't get it, but it's also not something that's unfamiliar to many of you who are in Western Europe. The cost of living there is explosively high. While your groceries might be lower, the idea of a young person owning a house in much of Western Europe, it's just it's a dream, it's a fantasy. And most of us are hedging or hoping that we get economic collapse simply so we can buy a home, which is a disaster. Like, what a time to be alive where you can sit there and say, the best thing that could happen right now is for economic collapse. 1.5 million in Vancouver to buy a home on the low end. And I bet it's a dump too. It's probably something you'd have to put hundreds of thousands of dollars in to renovate before you could even live there. And that's the other really incredible thing about a lot of those houses too in Canada and these major cities. No one's living in them. They're just bought to hide money from the CCP. That's it. That's the only reason that they're doing it. And they've done it in Australia. They've done it in a number of countries. So they simply can just offshore their resources. And we have seen this happen a little bit in the United States, not to the same level, thankfully. It is still possible for young people to own a home in rural areas. The issue is there are not jobs to support them. And one of the things that Lauren hit that I had talked about a little bit on my channel is that there's this push for the trade skills in the United States. We need trades, we need tradesmen. And I agree with that 100% because we are experiencing a literal population collapse in the United States right now. The numbers don't lie. Baby boomers did not have children in the volume or numbers that past generations did. And I forgot the channel's name. If I can remember it, I'll post it in a community post. But it was a Zoomer. He's got some really funny humor videos, but was also sharing facts and figures about the population decline and how he grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of kids, but then when he moved out of the urban area into the suburbs, nobody had children. And I was thinking back to my childhood neighborhood as a millennial. On a street that had 30 plus homes on it, there were only 3 or 4 houses that had kids. That's scary. The average age in the United States is 37.8. The average tradesman is in their 40s. Who is going to keep our infrastructure running when no one wants to go into these fields? And part of the reason they're not going to go into these fields is the cost of training, the cost of the tools, and the fact that the only people who seem to make money in that industry or in those industries are individuals who are working on government contracts or on sites that have government contracts. That's it. Those are the only tradesmen who seem to be doing well, or they own a firm and they've been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years. So how are you able to support yourself, let alone the idea of raising a family on $15, $16, $20 an hour, which is just the prevailing, that's the common wage. If you're not making at least 15 right now and you're watching this video, you need to leave your job and find someone who's going to pay you at least 15 because that's just the standard minimum wage now. I'm not saying I have a solution to this issue. I was talking to a couple people on Twitter about this. How do we fix this, especially for the next generation coming up? Because the Zoomers appear to be making the same exact mistakes as millennials right now. They're going to college. They're not learning anything. They're learning nothing of worth, and most of them are keenly aware of that. And many of them are going, admittedly, for the experience. They're going because that's the only other place to meet young people. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of young people in a lot of the United States. There simply aren't. If you go out and about, you're a younger person, pay attention to the demographics in your area. You'd be amazed. When I was up on the Cape for a while in Massachusetts, one of the things I picked up on was just how old the population was there. There were no young people. And in the past, they had relied heavily on young people would come with their folks to these summer communities, these summer homes. They would work a summer job and then go back to school. Well, those kids now suffer from such a high level of affluenza that they don't do that anymore. They don't care. So the majority of service jobs are staffed by people literally in their 60s and 70s who then go on unemployment for the rest of the year. And I think we're going to unfortunately see more and more of that, especially in seasonal communities. Let me pull up that live chat. Emmy, there are still affordable homes in the Midwest, but you'll need to do some work. I do all the work myself. I paid $10K below market. Yeah, that's absolutely possible. But that goes right back into how many young people actually have those skills to do that. The amount of money that you would need to get into a home, right? So you'd have to save up a down payment. If you're not as fortunate to be in a position like me, I have access to VA home loans. If I didn't have access to a VA home loan, I would have never been able to buy a house. So most young people they're not in that position. The mistakes that people are making right now financially just really shock me. I don't know how most of these liberal arts schools are surviving right now. I don't understand why their attendance numbers are so high. I think part of it goes back to what we saw even though around 2008, 2012, where a lot of young people just started going to college. They started to get these master's degrees, these PhDs. And yeah, exactly, Emmy. You're 53 and you've been in construction your whole life. So you have the knowledge, you have the capability, and you've had time to save money to be able to do that type of stuff. My question actually to you, Emmy, would be, would you or are you seeing young people who are interested? And without divulging too much of your personal information, have you had any young people or family friends come to you with their kids or their kids approach you and say, hey, can you train me? Because I would like to do this. I would bet that the number of people that have approached you in that capacity is probably pretty limited, and that if they did, they didn't stick it out. I do have a friend who, and I believe I mentioned this in the past, went into masonry. And he's done exceedingly well in it because nobody really wants to work in that arena. They don't want to be out in the sun all day. They don't want to be out there breaking their back, literally. But he's done well. He's been in it over 10 years. And that's just not something that we see a lot of young people willing to do at this point. One of the other things I would encourage you guys to check out in that vein as we talk about societal collapse, economic collapse, it's a two-part series that was produced by the Academy of Ideas, I believe is the channel name. Let me just verify that. I put it in my notes here. If not, I'll link them. But yeah, the Academy of Ideas. And he was talking about societal collapse and inflation causing collapse. And he did it in such a beautiful way. I would encourage you to check those out. And it's not fear-mongering. We know what's happening. We can see it with our own eyes. The numbers that are available don't lie. And the numbers that are more in line with reality are much worse than what the official numbers are in terms of homelessness, in terms of inflation, in terms of the welfare state that we've created. Rome did the same exact things that we're doing right now. Once Nero realized he could just debase the value of currency, every emperor after him did the same thing. And we've been watching this now happen over several administrations, over several generations. Hey, Buzzard Prepper, how's it going? And it's not going to instantly get better. So at least be educated in these topics, and hopefully it'll help you make a better decision going forward as to how to best insulate yourself. And really the only solution that I can see at this point as far as insulating yourself from societal and economic collapse is simply to not have debt, right? Or have as little debt as humanly possible. Secure debt, maybe like a car payment, but nothing exorbitant, right? Don't go out and buy an $80,000 pickup truck right now. That shocked me to see people doing that, especially early on over the last 3 years, where people were going out and buying very, very expensive, overpriced vehicles. And we're beginning to see some of the pricing fall on that because the production is beginning to catch a little bit more up with the demand for new vehicles. But even the idea of a young person owning a new car right now is just such a joke, let alone owning a house. So the used car market is still a disaster in the United States. We know that, and that's just not going to get resolved anytime soon, especially as we inevitably get some other type of cash for clunkers program in the near future when they push for EVs. Hey, Frumpy American, how's it going? No, exactly. A lot of people are waking up to this. This is what I thought was so interesting about the Lauren Southern video is she's a fairly mainstream conservative pundit, and everyone can just everybody can smell it. Everybody can sense that something is absolutely wrong with the way things are going and the direction that we're on. It's just completely unsustainable. The question is, when does that economic collapse happen? When does that societal collapse happen? And that's why we have to use every day to try and get further and further ahead. If it's something as simple as going out and buying a 5-pound bag of rice, just so you know that you have additional supplies on hand when that's not as readily available as it once was, do it. Because you're going to see more and more people going for the less expensive food options with time. We're seeing it right now. I have friends who work in the grocery industry who've been telling me that, because I'll ask, I was like, hey, what shortages are you seeing? What's the latest trend? What emails is your company putting out warning about price hikes? And he said, yeah, the price hikes thing is definitely happening. We're going to see that 20-30% increase on a lot of things, but most people are now shopping in the center of the store. They're not shopping the outer aisles. They're not getting the healthy stuff. Because if you shop really on just the outer edges of an American grocery store, that's the fresh stuff. That's the healthy stuff. That's the less processed stuff. Fresh strawberries, nice. Yeah, your garden was looking awesome the last time I saw it, Van City. And I'm super happy for you guys that you were able to make the transition out into the countryside, because not enough people are making that jump. Not everyone can, unfortunately. And I'll talk more about urban preparedness and suburban preparedness in the near future, because that's the position I'm in presently. I'm hoping to escape from the suburban jungle in due time, maybe by year's end, maybe by early next year. We'll see, but it's just not sustainable. We have to make that shift from consumer to producer. That's the only way to get ahead of what we're seeing right now. You need to take some production of your food back from the system. Yeah, eggs are going through the roof. The best pricing I've seen on eggs, and I eat a lot of eggs, anywhere from 6 to 12 a day, typically. Costco, they've been very consistent, $11.99, I want to say, for their big bulk pack, like 36 eggs. That's been the most consistently priced thing, and that's when they have it. There have been times with the latest influenza outbreak amongst the bird population that they haven't had those. They had consistently brown eggs for several weeks, and eventually the large white industrial boxes started to come back. One of the other things, too, that's still gone from the shelves, baby formula. No one's talking about this. If you look it up, you'll see in the past few days that the issue has been raised again. But the baby formula crisis in the United States has gone unfixed for over a year. Every time I go to the grocery store, I always check the area out just to see what's going on. And no one is talking about that. Like, that would be and should be one of the hottest political issues of the entire campaign season, is that over a year later, we still cannot feed infants. That's insane to me, because there's still a lot of kids who have special needs, kids who've been born over the last year who need very specific types of baby formula for proper development. And we don't have access to those resources still. I don't understand how this could have gone on so long. I know there was a small amount of funding that was allocated to this. And I know that there was that public relations stunt where they loaded up a couple military planes with a few pallets of baby formula. And I was laughing. I was like, okay, so how many hours will that last on the shelves? And how long will it take to get that to the shelves? Let's be realistic. So the prices on that stuff will likely continue to climb as the availability it's just not there over a year later. Turkey, as well. As I mentioned, the bird flu epidemic. Turkey is going to be really hard to get this year, so if you want to put a turkey back for Christmas, clear some space now. If you want to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, same thing. Head out there and put that back now, because the pricing with demand is likely to go through the roof as they've had to cull a large number of birds. Let me go to the live chat real fast. Black Hills Co-op for... Yeah, if you can get on a farmer's co-op, that is absolutely ideal if you're in the right location. Just between the access to quality produce, eggs, milk, you really should look into that, because the initial buy-in is usually not too excessive. So definitely something worth looking into if you're in a position to do that. If anyone has any comments or questions before I dip out, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up in just a minute. One of the things I did mention, 9,000 gallons of propane. Yeah, no, that'll definitely keep you going for quite a while. That is something, by the way, you guys should not ignore, especially if you use it for heating or cooking, because I know that a lot of communities rely, and a lot of homes rely on propane. You'll have large tanks stored outside the property or off of the kitchen, and that's definitely worth topping off this season. Pricing on, for example, natural gas in the state of Florida has absolutely skyrocketed. I did want to hit on the debates real fast as well, I guess, before I dip out. But one of the things that Charlie Crist, who will never win, never be governor again, hopefully, oh my goodness, he hit home on the fact that electricity prices have been going through the roof, which is not a fault of the state. Everyone across the United States has seen massive power hikes, to the point where some people who live in modest homes in Florida are seeing $400 electric bills now if they run on natural gas every single month, especially over summer. Now we're not having to run the AC as much, so we'll see a little bit of a decrease. But as people flip on their heat, because we have primarily HVAC down here, nobody uses oil heaters. Some homes, older homes, are equipped with fireplaces, but that's not a common feature because it's just really not necessary most of the year. What were you saying, Van City? Would I raise chickens? Oh, absolutely. If I was in an area where I could do that, I absolutely would raise chickens. That would probably be the start of my my little homesteady activity, would be chickens. From there, I would like to maybe scale up to 2 goats and go from there. Just depends. I'm mixed on goats just because I know sometimes, and I've seen some people who really hate them, some people who really love to deal with them. But chickens for sure to get started with, just because I do eat a lot of eggs in my diet, and it's just such a versatile and excellent food that a lot of people just don't eat enough of, frankly. More eggs, the better, in my opinion. See if I missed anybody's chat. But yes, yeah, and as I mentioned in the past too, before I dip out, and I'm glad to see that people are beginning to take a little more notice of what's happening, but you definitely do need to have some alternate power sources. I do have a link to one below. I ended up using, over the 5 days I didn't have electricity, I ended up using that Montech solar unit that I've mentioned in the past. I do have an affiliate link below with them, and I was able to pull a lot of power off of that. I was able to cook eggs using it with a extremely powerful hot plate. There's all kinds of different uses between keeping all my mobile devices charged. Had there been power running to my internet, to the actual line, I could have kept the internet up. It was able to power the modems with no issue. They had a very, very small power draw. So if you live in an urban environment especially, those lithium generators are such a valuable tool. You don't have to go with mine. Just pick one that's a reputable brand, one that's well vetted, one that has a good track record. Is going to be very, very much more ideal. One that has replacement parts readily available too. And Montech, I'm sure if you contact them, you can get replacement parts, but they're a smaller company. So that's just something to keep in mind if you opt for them. I just like the fact it comes in a Pelican style case. It's portable. It doesn't look like a solar generator, and it stores very, very flat. So you could stick it underneath your bed. You could leave it out in the hallway and run a couple small fans to bedrooms to keep your home more comfortable in the summer months. And you could run a heated blanket during the winter months. That's going to be absolutely critical. Make sure you're, if you have a surplus store, military surplus store near you, look at their wool blanket selection, look at their gloves, coats, everything. Just the fact that they have been grooming us, if you will, preparing us with the headlines that'll come out infrequently about the upcoming blackouts this winter. It's really just shocking to me. They're already conditioning us that this isn't just going to be isolated to Europe. This is going to happen here. The Northeast is under a major risk of a blackout come winter. With snow rolling in, with colder conditions rolling in, enough people will fire up other HVAC systems or other systems that are hooked up to the grid, and it could take out the entire electrical grid of the Northeast. So if you're up there, you got to take this stuff very, very seriously and plan accordingly. Maybe look at having that one room in your house that you know you're going to keep heated, keep warm. Some of those buddy heaters are all right, but obviously you have to be careful with the threats of carbon monoxide. But there's been enough testing on those that I feel fairly comfortable with the idea of using one, but I would still probably crack my window just a hair, just to ensure that in the event there was a malfunction, there wouldn't really be an issue with that. So that's something to keep in mind if you use one of those buddy heaters or something that runs off of propane. But you should definitely put some of that back as a supplement to the lithium generators, especially if you're not able to charge it. And unfortunately, one of the fastest ways to charge those generators it's not off the solar panels, it's off a gasoline generator. So if you're able to have both, I would encourage that. But the big drawback too to those gas generators, if there's heavy snowfall, if it's raining, you can't really run those outside. So just things to keep in mind as you're putting all this stuff back, that everything has some type of limitation to it. So just have those contingencies in place for every single limitation you might have, which again could just include a bunch of wool blankets and everybody snuggling and cuddling together that night. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in this morning. I'm going to go ahead and end this stream. Continue to do what you're doing. As I've mentioned, make sure to put various useful manuals back, and it doesn't have to just be stuff pertaining to Europe, but even just farming resources, anything that you can think of that might be useful, medical resource books. I've mentioned I've got couple volumes actually of the Survival Medicine Handbook. Go ahead and check that out as well. Super useful tool. When there is no doctor and when there is no dentist, are also super useful tools because we continue to see what's happening in Europe right now. And the situation there is not improving, especially in their hospitals. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching and have a good rest.